Welcome to Bucket List Careers, the podcast. I'm Krista Laurie. This is episode 164. Today, we're in studio with my guest, Andrea Moore Beaulieu. She is a designer and entrepreneur who's taken 20 years of industry experience to create the modern, elevated street fashion brand Moore. That's with 2 O's. And she has a shop based right here in Larchmont. Welcome to the podcast, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me today.
And it's not been that long since you opened. When did you first open up here?
Yeah, I opened the Makers New York in March of last year. So we're coming up on our year anniversary. So excited.
I am so excited to come in and shop. Well, we want to talk, obviously, about your career evolution. What brought you to this place, which you feel is your bucket list career? And have you walk us through it so we can learn from it? So let's dial it back. I believe you always like to sew. You were always a creative.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people I've been sewing my entire life.
Nice.
Started sewing when I was 6 and just kind of always knew. I would look people up and down. My mom says when I was like 3 years old, just teeny little child looking at what people were wearing and kind of always had that pull to create. And I come from a family of makers, so always had creativity happening around the house. My mom is a painter, and she sewed kind of recreationally, making all of us girls like matching outfits for Easter. But
she definitely did your Halloween costumes, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You were never wearing the plastic.
Right, yep.
Okay, so talk to me about your professional path.
Yeah.
What was your first job, and did you study design?
I did. I went to school for fashion design. I went to school in North Carolina, and it was a much more textile-driven program, so a lot about science of textiles and a lot of factories in the area, so being able to see like vertical integration, like cotton going in one side and denim coming out the other side.
Cool.
So just really interesting, kind of a different take on, I would think, what people would think maybe like going to FIT would be like in the city or something like that.
Right.
Which I really enjoyed. I felt like I knew a lot already about the construction of garments and things, but I just felt like I needed to expand beyond that. So kind of learning the inner workings of fabrications and how they're made and all of that was so interesting.
Right. But more on a corporate level, you said to me. I mean, this was 2 decades of experience before you opened up your own place.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that and what you wanted to do differently by being an entrepreneur.
Yes. So after school, I kind of hopped around the country working for a variety of brands in a variety of capacities. So the first place that I lived after school was Las Vegas, which is, kind of surprising. People are like, whoa, why didn't you move to New York or LA? I did an internship doing wardrobe for movies. And so met a great group of people and shifted to the desert, which was so interesting.
You were obviously pretty fearless to make that kind of move.
It was so fun. Yeah. My mom always says, she just could do anything, go anywhere. Nice. So moved there with a bunch of new friends and went from there to New York and lived in New York for several years, then lived in Los Angeles.
What was your favorite place, by the way?
Oh, goodness. Visually, I really loved the desert. I just think it's such a special place. And when you live in a place like Las Vegas, you don't really do the touristy stuff. I mean, much like, living in New York or LA, you don't necessarily go to the Empire State Building often,
So true.
Hollywood Boulevard, like you just don't do those things. So every place has their own like little special things. And so then when I was living in LA, I ended up leaving my corporate job and decided to start my own brand.
Nice.
And that was such a major jump.
Well, you did say to me that you felt your pivotal moment when you thought, I don't want to work necessarily in those types of environments anymore, came when you became a mom.
Yes,
when you
absolutely.
welcomed twins into the world. And that was 2019?
It was,
Okay,
yes.
So you did stay home for a bit, a full-time parent.
I was, yeah.
But talk to me about how you were feeling and the origins of this idea for the Makers New York. And then, of course, we'll talk about how you pulled it off.
Yeah, so prior to having my twins, I did have my own store, started my brand, all of that. produced fashion shows, but I lived on the West Coast. And when I found out I was pregnant with twins, we thought we should probably move to where family is so that it can be, we can have some help. And I had intended to open a brand new store as soon as I moved back to the city, and just thought that that's where things would happen quickly.
Of course, 2019 is right before the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely.
I will tell you 90% of the guests that I have some story about how lockdown and the pandemic changed their trajectory.
Absolutely.
So how did it affect you?
Yeah, so at that time I had 7-month-old twins, and I just was taking clients in the building that I lived in. I had a space that I was using.
Taking clients in what way? What were you doing?
So I was doing
Dressing
custom
nice.
clothing, even just doing tailoring. I was still doing creative shoots. And I just felt like the creativity just never really stopped. But being able to find that proper outlet, outside of the building that I was living in, finding the time, with 2 little baby twins at home. I was just working when they were sleeping, and when they're teeny tiny, that's much more than, once they start to get up and move around.
Sure.
So we stayed in Brooklyn until they were almost, they were like 2.5. And then my husband and I started talking about, do we want to have another baby? And if we do, what's that going to look like? So we moved out of Brooklyn, came out to Westchester, and had my daughter. She's 2 years old now.
Yeah.
And when she was born, I just thought, I'm never going to be able to have another store. I'll never be able to.
Twins and then another baby. And
Yeah.
yet you still had the ambition and the drive to do this.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Oh, thank you for that.
Impressive. And all right. So was it when your youngest was 2 that you said, okay, it's time?
Just before 2, I honestly had a dream, like a physical dream. I was sleeping at night, and in my dream, I was organizing with a friend, filling up a space, finding vendors and people that were makers. And there was one space left. And in my dream, I asked my friend, like, what are we doing with this space? And he said, that's yours. And I was like, Okay, that sounds great. What are we calling this place? And he said, The Makers. And I woke up in the morning and I was like, it's happening. We got to do it. It's going to happen now.
You manifested it in your dream.
It really came to me.
I'm sure it wasn't as
wild.
easy as that. This place is yours, by the way. So let's talk about finding the space for it. I love the name The Makers.
Oh, thank you so much.
So the brand is Moore.
Yes.
Obviously, an homage to your name.
Yeah.
And you also carry stuff from your mom's.
Yes.
I guess she's an artist.
She is. Yeah,
And
she's
your
a copper
sister.
sculptor.
So is that why you sort of came up with this plural, The Makers?
Yeah, so I was thinking it would be great to be able to house a space where creatives can come together. Maybe it isn't just me working there. Maybe it's, a bunch of other people being able to create in this space and also sell the beautiful things that they're making.
Yeah.
And I was thinking it would be other apparel designers, because it's really tricky trying to find local designers and the special things that they create. And as it turns out, it's really hard to find local designers. So, hey, local designers, if you're out there and you want a place to be able to sell.
For sure. And what would you say is unique about the brand? Because I know you pride yourself on using vegan fabrics and local production, but with the caveat of not sacrificing craftsmanship.
Right.
What's the secret sauce there?
So all production happens within the Makers. So when people come into the store, it's a very unique shopping experience. They're able to see the clothes that are on the rack being made right in front of them. Mm-hmm. So that alone, I think, creates like a really special environment. But then the brand itself, I grew up in the woods of New Hampshire and went to school in North Carolina. There's a bit of country. There's a bit of kind of like woodsy, natural nature to what I create. But then I've, as an adult, lived in all these cities, and combining those two visual aesthetics of whether it be the fabrication, having some kind of natural element, so what it's made out of, or the pattern that's on the fabric, something like that.
Yeah.
Or even the shapes being a little bit more organic and kind of hanging on the body as opposed to being so tight and restrictive. So just kind of marrying all the parts of my life together to come into this brand.
That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Well, why would you decide to do a shop in this era of e-commerce. I mean, I love going into a store. I love trying things on, but I also recognize how challenging it must be for new entrepreneurs in the fashion area. So talk to me about having your own boutique versus doing this online.
Yeah, I honestly didn't know how it was going to go. I just thought, I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be right now, and let's just give it a try.
Took the leap, but you always wanted to do something
Absolutely.
with brick and mortar.
Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, it's not even a year, right?
It isn't, no. And
Are you selling online as well?
Minimally. It really is just all face-to-face, like direct-to-consumer experience. And I think that that's so special, especially considering how much people rely on selling online, and then you don't get to interface with your clientele. And that is just so valuable, especially coming from being a stay-at-home mom and not having the face-to-face interactions with other adults and other humans.
Right.
I really missed that.
After lockdown, and also, yes, being a stay-at-home parent, we value that so differently now.
Absolutely.
And I think there are a lot of people who really love that shop local vibe.
Yes.
You're getting to know people in here. Why Larchmont, by the way? I mean, we're happy to have you. And this is like a really grassroots kind of podcast, and we're doing this out of this Mamaroneck studio, LMC Media, and I love it because I constantly get this steady stream of guests who are just so talented from all around me. So
wonderful.
What brought you to Larchmont?
Yeah, so I live in New Rochelle. And I thought, if I'm going to be doing this, it needs to be something that's close to home.
Yep.
Having little children at home and trying to balance the back and forth. And now the twins are in kindergarten, so drop off, pick up, all of that, trying to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
And still being close to my daughter. I eat lunch with her every day. So, just being able to pop home a mile away was all really, really important.
And so your mother and sister, who we talked about this earlier, you're showcasing their creations as well. Are they local?
They are not. No, they live in Asheville, North Carolina.
Okay, so they come every so often. So talk to me about what your mom makes and what your sister does.
Yeah, so my mom has always been a creative ever since she was little, just starting out with drawing, and then she did painting. Yeah. And within the last maybe 10 to 12 years, she kind of discovered sculpture and working with wire and metals. Cool. And now she's nearly primarily working with copper. And she started using fire and flames to flame paint her work, and just creates these gorgeous sculptures, mostly naturally inspired. So lots of animals and just beautiful. She did a 3-foot heron and hand marked every single leaf on this bird. I mean, just very intricate,
real attention
beautiful.
To detail there.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then what about your sister?
Yeah, so my sister, she is a first grade teacher, but she too has always been very creative, also a painter. But she takes flowers from her garden and then encases them and creates jewelry, which is so beautiful and again, so intricate. You can kind of just see the colors and shapes from far away, and then you get up close and it's crazy attention to detail. Wow. Teeny tiny little flowers and little leaves and just beautiful things. Really special.
It's obviously a family affair of creatives here. I love that. I love it. Tell me about obstacles, because starting your own business, there are a lot of them.
Absolutely.
What do you feel held you back, or what was the toughest thing you had to push past in terms of roadblocks to create the Makers New York?
Yeah, I think starting out, it was really thinking about the balance in life between my children and them being my number one priority for the last 5 years, and being physically present for them. Yeah. And stepping away and trying to navigate what that looks like. What are my hours going to be? What makes sense?
I'm sure you threw yourself in full force, right? And
I did. I really did. But
carving the time isn't easy.
Yes. And I tried to have them present with me as much as possible so they could see this transition and experience it with me. So fashion shows that I've done, they've been models in my shows. Aww. So walking down the runway, and just if I'm popping in the shop for a couple hours on a Saturday, they're in there with me and they're seeing what I'm doing. And
so cute.
Yeah, I just always had this thought that I want the lull of a sewing machine to forever remind them of being in my store and being close to me, and just kind of having that.
God, you make me cry. And you know what? Even though they're really young, they're absorbing this. Yeah. They're seeing mom crush it on her own. And I love that. So what about listeners out there who are like you and want to do something creative, something outside the box, getting out of corporate, or even coming out of a career pause for children?
Yeah.
What do you feel like is your biggest takeaway for people to try to remember that's sort of based on your experience in terms of finding professional purpose, your bucket list career?
Yeah, I think that really listening to your inner voice, it's okay to have something that you've been doing your entire life, and then something in you is saying, this doesn't feel right anymore, and this doesn't satisfy me internally and mentally the way that it used to. And sometimes
and you're not always the same person,
exactly,
right?
Yeah, and that listening to that evolutionary voice that's inside your head and your heart, and having that be an okay thing to listen to and pay attention to. And I think sometimes it can start as a teeny tiny step, just trying to make the time for whatever this new thing is. Sometimes it has to be at night, after you're doing your full-time job, whatever that may be. Just taking those few moments for yourself to be able to really listen, and then kind of making the small steps and taking steps toward whatever that satisfaction is in your heart.
Excellent. Excellent advice. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's send people online to find out more about you. Which platforms should we direct them to?
Yeah, I have an Instagram both for the store, and that is The Makers New York. Mm-hmm. And my brand is Moore, MOORE_NYC.
Awesome. Andrea Moore Beaulieu, thank you so much for taking the time. I know it wasn't that far of a drive for you to come by, but it's so appreciated. We loved hearing about your journey.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Such a joy.
My pleasure. And that'll do it for this episode of Bucket List Careers. I'm Krista Laurie. Thanks so much for joining me. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, find us online at Bucket List Careers on all the social platforms. Until the next time, be well.